ਜਿਵੇਂ ਮੈਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਸੀ ਕਿ ਅੱਜ ਆਪਾਂ ਇਮੀਗ੍ਰੇਸ਼ਨ ਫਰਾਡ ਤੇ ਮੈਰਿਜ ਫਰਾਡ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਸਾਡਾ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਹੈਗਾ ਤੇ ਇਸ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਰਾਜ ਤੇ ਮੈਨੇ ਇੱਕ ਪੋਲੀਟੀਸ਼ੀਅਨ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਹੈ this week ਜਿਹੜਾ ਕਿ no other politician has accomplished what our guest has accomplished. ਇਹਦਾ ਮਤਲਬ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਜਿਹੜਾ ਸਾਡਾ ਗੈਸਟ ਹੈਗਾ ਉਹ ਉਜਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਹੈਗਾ ਤੇ ਉਜਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ 1968 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ BC ਆਇਆ UBC ਤੋਂ ਉਹਨੇ BA ਤੇ LLB ਆਪਦੀ ਪਾਸ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਤੇ 1979 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵਕਾਲਤ ਦੀ ਪ੍ਰੈਕਟਿਸ ਉਹਨੇ ਸ਼ੁਰੂ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਵੈਨਕੂਵਰ 1979 ਤੇ 1983 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ ਇਲੈਕਸ਼ਨ ਲੜਿਆ ਤੇ ਦੋਨੋਂ ਵਾਰੀ ਹਾਰ ਗਏ ਸੀਗੇ NDP ਦੇ ਕੈਂਡੀਡੇਟ ਸੀਗੇ ਫਿਰ 1991 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਉਹਨੇ MLA ਸੀਟ ਜਿੱਤੀ ਆ BC ਲੈਜਿਸਲੇਚਰ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਦੋਂ 1991 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜਿੱਤੇ ਆ ਉਹ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਸਾਹਿਬ ਨੇ Minister of Government Services ਰਿਹਾ Minister of Multiculturalism and Human Rights ਰਿਹਾ ਤੇ ਨਾਲੇ Attorney General ਯਾਨੀ ਕਿ Minister of Justice ਵੀ ਰਿਹਾ ਤੇ ਪਹਿਲੀ ਵਾਰੀ ਆਪਣੀ South Asian first South Asian Attorney General ਬਣੇ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ 2000 Premier ਬਣੇ February 2nd 2000 Premier British Columbia ਬਣ ਗਏ 33rd Premier of BC 2004 ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ Ujjal Dosanjh ran for MP in Vancouver South for the Liberal Party ਫਿਰ ਉਹ Minister of Health ਬਣੇ ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ Liberal government ਹਾਰ ਗਈ ਉਦੋਂ critic for national defense ਬਣੇ Raj Ujjal Dosanjh arguably is one of the most accomplished well I don't even think you can argue it he is the most accomplished South Asian politician in Canadian history.
Yeah, there's little to gainsay that. I mean, ultimately, the guy is the very first East Indian origin premier of a province in Alberta. Like you said, his resume is unparalleled.
You know, ਜਦੋਂ ਇਸ ਹਫ਼ਤੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਬਾਰੇ ਮੈਂ this weekend ਦੋ ਤਿੰਨ ਦੋਸਤਾਂ ਨਾਲ ਸੀਗਾ ਤੇ ਜਦੋਂ ਮੈਂ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਉਜਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਨੇ ਇਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਰਾਜ ਲੋਕ ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਉਹ ਵਧੀਆ ਗੱਲ ਹੈ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਜਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਨੀ ਹੈ ਪਰ a few of them ਨੇ ਕਿਹਾ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਕਿਉਂ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਣੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਰਾਜ he is not without his own controversy though.
Yeah, and ultimately, you know, it all stems back down to 1984, the repercussions, the consequences of what happened in India. And so there's going to be heated feelings on both sides. To some individuals, Ujjal Dosanjh has come across as a great moderate voice of modern Sikhism. And to others, he's turned into this traitor, an individual who's turned against his own community.
You know, I can give ਆਪਾਂ ਸਰੋਤਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਥੋੜੀ ਜਿਹੀ ਐਗਜ਼ਾਮਪਲ ਦੇ ਦਈਏ ਕਿ ਕਿਹੋ ਜਿਹੀ ਕੰਟਰੋਵਰਸੀ ਉਜਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਨੇ ਦੇਖੀ ਆਪਦੀ ਲਾਈਫ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸੈਲਫ ਕ੍ਰੀਏਟਡ ਕੰਟਰੋਵਰਸੀ 1985 ਆਪਣੇ 84 ਰਾਈਟਸ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਨੇ he spoke out against the Khalistan movement and as a result of that he was beaten up and you know had suffered a broken arm, I believe, and 80 stitches as he was beat up. Over the years, Dosanjh has been a critic of the extremist movement to the point where Raj last year, I don't know if you saw this, but he on CBC News World identified that Sikh extremism was on the rise.
Yeah, Ujjal Dosanjh has never been shy about espousing his views openly. And so, you know, you live in Canada, and I guess my opinion is that we live in a free society, and one of the hallmarks of a free society is the ability to criticize and voice your opinions. But unfortunately, he's often touched a nerve.
ਪਰ ਜਦੋਂ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਵਾਰੀ ਉਜਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਅਸੀਂ ਖੈਰ ਕੋਈ ਸਿੱਖ ਐਕਸਟ੍ਰੀਮਿਜ਼ਮ ਜਾਂ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਨਹੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਉਹਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕੀਤੀ ਆ ਮੈਰਿਜ ਫਰਾਡ ਦੇ ਇਸ਼ੂ ਦੇ ਉੱਤੇ ਤੋ ਹੁਣ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਦਿੰਦੇ ਆ ਸਾਡੀ ਉਜਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ
I wanted to start, I know a lot of people on the West Coast and Ottawa obviously know you and a lot of lawyers in the South Asian community see you as a
I was going to come to you.
as a bit of an icon. But could you give us a bit of background as to when you came to Canada and your sort of travels through the years?
Well, I left India in 1964, then came to Canada by England in 1968, and worked in various jobs in Britain and both number of clean chains in Canada, broke my back, went back to school, did my BA in law in British Columbia, and was active on the issues of farm workers, domestic workers, and janitorial subcontract workers in terms of fighting for their rights and legislation protecting them.
For an hour and a half.
To general human rights advocacy.
We're going to go to commercial.
And that's what led me into running for a provincial seat that I eventually won after losses in 1991, and then went on to have various cabinet positions, premiership, and then eventually ran for the Liberal Party of Canada in 2004, became provincial council for about a year and a half.
I think you might be omitting some details there, like being the first Indo-Canadian premier of any province in this country. But what I like,
And also,
First Attorney General or first Premier, it's pretty difficult to talk about yourself. That's why I was being
you can leave that to us. You also left out that you're, I believe, the first Indo-Canadian to receive Queen's Counsel appointment as well.
yes.
All right. Now that we have that under our belt, our topic this week on our show, Mr. Dosanjh, is we're talking about abandoned brides, abandoned grooms, and marriage fraud in general. In your time in the federal government, can you give us a bit of background as to any immigration reforms that
After
took
the music,
place
there was no
while
sound,
you
then
were,
Ellie got cut off and
in
sound
cabinet?
now commercial.
Well, no immigration reforms took place with respect to this particular issue during my time in federal cabinet.
Pretty good guess.
I'm aware of the issue from my days as an activist in the community and then in provincial government and federal government. And generally, when you live in the community, you come across people who feel victimized by those that come into this country under false pretenses to marry and remain married, but it seems that their only purpose is to institute immigrants, and the vast majority of those cases were women coming to Canada under false pretenses, but in the last few years, some women have been doing the same, not in as large a number as men. It's a very difficult issue. I know that various associations and individuals have been seeking government intervention on this issue in the form of a law, perhaps seeking
How's the response been to the show?
parties to live together for a year or 2 years, 3 years, however much time they deem essential before being granted permanent status in Canada. My problem with that request and that suggestion always is that if in the case of women in particular, and perhaps in the case of some men too, but for women in particular, you don't want to force women who come to Canada to marry to be forced to remain in violent and abusive relationships just so that they could become permanent residents. And if we can resolve that issue somehow, then I really have no difficulty in agreeing to that particular suggestion. I have been an advocate of equality for women. My wife is a women's rights activist in her own right, and I'm very conscious of these issues.
well, Mr. Dosanjh, just by way of a background, our listeners may not know that when you do marrying someone is the fastest way to get permanent residency in Canada. So if someone gets married, sponsors their husband or wife, that person is a permanent resident upon arrival in Canada. Now, it appears that this government, Jason Kenney is the Minister of Citizenship and Immigration, they're suggesting a conditional permanent residence, that someone comes to Canada and then it's a conditional permanent resident that immigration will check up on that relationship and then grant permanent residency after a year or two. And of course, your concern and other people's concern is that these individuals might be in exploitative situations. They might be forced to remain in relationships that that could be abusive.
Well, that is the concern. Other than that, there is no concern. And I obviously, Mr. Kenny has proposed this. I understand, and I differ with him. I think if you were to look into this more thoroughly, he may in fact agree himself that this would be very, very difficult for relationships where there might be abuse or victimization in other ways. I believe that there are many other models. I understand that Britain has a different model, Australia may have a different model. I haven't looked at it. But if there is an element of coercion in that law, which is what it is when you force someone to live together for a year or 2 years before granting them permanent residence, that is a great deal of coercion. People marry for all sorts of reasons. They marry to come to Canada, they marry for love, they marry for money, they marry for other reasons. I believe marrying to come to Canada is simply marrying a passport, and that's wrong. How do we tackle that? Another question. I don't have a magic formula that I can use. However, I believe that government needs to actually enforce the rules that currently more thoroughly. I believe that somebody came to Canada after the fact, because they believe that came to Canada only for the purpose of coming to Canada based on a marriage under the false pretense. At that point, I think there should be some process available retroactively to take a look at that person, but not prevent a person from seeking landed status or getting landed status for a year or 2 years, and therefore being themselves responsible.
Mr. Dusanj, I think we discussed this before, but then what do you see the role of government in preventing marriage fraud in Canada?
Well, I think the government, government can't babysit all of us in all our lives. I think that we, who may want to go back and marry a bride or a groom from India or from some other country, we need to take individual responsibility in making the right choices with our eyes open, with the possibility that a person who may come to the country may simply coming to marry a passport rather than marry you. And I think that in that sense, we need to take individual responsibility. Government can't. No matter how many laws you pass, government cannot babysit us through our lives. And I think it would be extremely tragic if we ask the government to actually force people to live in marital relationships where there might be abuse or violence. I think that's absolutely wrong.
That's an interesting point, especially coming from a individual who's been in the NDP and Liberal Party for so long. But I think your point is absolutely right, Mr. Dusanj. At what level does the government, do we look to the government to solve these questions or these answers? Mr. Dusanj, you must be aware, of course, that there are potentially tens of thousands of abandoned brides in India that largely grooms from Canada or America and the UK go to India, get married, take a dowry, and then of course never sponsor those women to Canada. Do you have any thoughts about this situation?
That's specific.
Well, I think that if
civil remedy in India.
If it's happening to brides in India, I don't think the government of Canada Canada can play a role in dealing with what happens to moms in Canada. If you have abandoned your marriage or a bride, it's a civil matter. I think what India can do, however, is make sure that after a proper determination, if the government of India through a judicial process determines that a particular individual has defrauded a particular woman, that they abandoned that woman after marriage, particularly when they, take millions in dowry, the government of India can say, all right, you're barred from coming back into the country. If you ever come back into the country, we're going to put you behind bars. I think that would be a great deterrent to those who want to go back to places like India, marry women, and then abandon them after taking millions of rupees in dowry and destroying women's lives. I agree with that, but I think government of Canada cannot be seen to be punishing someone who marries abroad and then doesn't sponsor someone, because you can't force people to sponsor your bride. I don't think that's you can take from the government.
Dasant Sahab, मैं सुनो, I guess I'll give you a hypothetical situation. काफी केस होंदे हैं जिहड़े अपने मुंडा उत्थे जाके ब्याह लैंदा, and I can use these examples because I've seen them in my practice. They आके they do the application process. They lucky आ जाती है, wife आ जाती है, and then ਜਦੋਂ ਆਉਂਦੀ ਹੈ within a year or so चली जाती है. And then you can start to read into it and find out that in actuality, again, she was just marrying a passport. So, to have people, stay here for that period of time and then, essentially, it's a case of marriage fraud. Should there be no teeth here to send that person back?
I think that's perhaps the government can consider a quasi-judicial or judicial process.
I think Dasant Sahab did mention that there is actually about enforcing the existing laws on the books. There is a way for the Canada Border Services Agency to investigate so-called marriage fraud. And certainly, there are existing laws that talk about misrepresentation, and there are people facing removal precisely because of that reason.
Yes, I think that can be done. I think those people can be denied Canadian citizenship because obviously, if you come into Canada under false pretenses, that's lying about a material fact, I would presume. And I think that is something the government of Canada can do. But you shouldn't be seeking more government intervention than that. Back in India, or places where the brides are abandoned, the government can be slightly more proactive because they have this idea of disallowing people from coming back into the country, or when they come back into the country, they may face a judicial process and may end up in jail. I think that's a more appropriate response. Here, the response ought to be after the fact. If somebody abandons a marriage after a year or 2 years or 6 months, however long the case may be, if a complaint is made by someone, the government may take a look at it, review it, and then determine whether or not the individual should be deported. I mean, that's a possibility.
For sure.
But upfront forcing people to live in relationships that might be abusive and violent is wrong.
Now, Mr. Dasant, I know that this is somewhat of a tangent from our discussion, but there's been a significant increase in the processing time for parents and grandparents to come to Canada. For example, I believe last year we only processed 11,000 parents and grandparents class. We're looking at over 100,000 backlog. We're looking at contemplating perhaps a 10-year plus wait to bring your parents to Canada. Do you have any comments regarding the increase in processing time for parents?
I think that it was an issue in the last elections, and the government
Nice. I like this.
indicated that our information was wrong. That was our information, and
Music
I
director.
believe that the processing time should be shorter. Even in our own time, when I was in government, it was increasing, and we were worried about it, and that's why in the last budget in 2005-2006, we had set aside several $100 million to actually make the processing faster and speedier. It is, if we are to remain a jurisdiction that emphasizes family reunification, and if we want the best and the brightest from different parts of the world to come here, then we need to make sure that we do a good job of allowing them to reunify with their families. And I'm not criticizing the current government because I'm no longer in partisan politics. I'm retired, but I think that's an issue that government needs to address.
Mr. Dosanjh, I'd really like to thank you on behalf of Andy and myself for coming on and, of course, sharing your views. Of course, we wish you all the best in your future endeavors. I'm sure that the story is yet to be told. You're not retired for too long, Mr.
I'm just going to tell both
I'm just retired from politics, not from public life.
Sounds good. Thank you very much.
Good talking to you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
ਹਾਂਜੀ ਦੋਸਤੋ ਇਹ ਸਨ ਸਾਡੀ ਇੰਟਰਵਿਊ ਉਜਵਲ ਦੋਸਾਂਝ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਰੋਤਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਦਾ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਸ਼ੋਅ ਨੂੰ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਡ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਯੂਜੂਅਲੀ ਅਸੀਂ 7 ਤੋਂ 8 ਵਜੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਪਰ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਇਹੋ ਜਿਹਾ ਹੈਗਾ ਕਿ ਆਪਾਂ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਐਕਸਟੈਂਡ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਤੇ 8 ਵਜੇ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਅਸੀਂ ਥੋੜ੍ਹਾ ਜਿਹਾ ਕਾਲਾਂ ਲਵਾਂਗੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਵਾਪਸ ਆਉਣੇ ਹਾਂ